go. We want to welcome you all to the big room where we'd love to hear about your sharings and or aha moments. Please do use raise your electronic hand, and you might find, depends, I may interrupt some of that for some other comments. So let's hear from you. Anyone would like to open up our discussion to share some things?
Whoa. I'm sorry, I pushed the wrong button. Somebody whose last name is Deal.
That was me.
Hi, you're it.
Deal.
You're up.
Hi. Hi, I am a member of the Wilmington, Delaware AUW branch, and we had 5 women in our group. So one of the stories that was shared was about a statue that's in the U.S. Capitol for the state of Florida, because each state has 2 monuments there that there was a big effort to try to move that to Lake County, Florida, and that effort was stopped. But the statue is going to be replaced with Mary McLeod Bethune, an African-American woman, and the person who was there is a Confederate general, a white Confederate general. So we had an interesting discussion about that. And then we all grew up in different areas, a couple of us in Ohio. One woman lives in Missouri, one moved from Maryland to the Villages, and then another one grew up in Miami and moved to St. Augustine. So we just talked about what it's been like, to live in different areas, and how we, have been impacted. I don't think we know a lot about how textbooks have been impacted. So that's something that we were curious about, is like, what's the current impact of textbooks and what children are learning in school today?
Good.
Okay.
Thank you. Linda Roberts is next.
Okay, thank you. So in answer to the question, but it's our history, what we summarized is that, number one, it's an incomplete history because it's only a history of the white Confederacy, does not include the history of the Black population and what it experienced during that time and since. Also, it's a story of oppression. It's not a noble history, but a history characterized by oppression, and the fact that, of course, the white population benefited economically through the institution of slavery. We also mentioned that it really goes beyond monuments, because now I grew up in the Washington, D.C., Maryland area, very close to Northern Virginia. Northern Virginia has, a strong Southern heritage, and also parts of Maryland. But it's beyond just the monuments. It's schools, school naming, street naming, obviously the flags, and even churches were mentioned. I know several high schools in Northern Virginia named for Robert E. Lee, Stonewall Jackson, Robert Mosby, et cetera, et cetera. And, those individuals, those generals, basically didn't want Black people to be educated. So how would you like to be a Black person going to high school named after an individual that didn't want you to get an education? So, it raises the sensitivity to a very high level. Yeah, that's it's not a noble history. And we feel that all of these monuments, whether they're school naming, street naming, physical monuments, should be eradicated. And one of the articles, or I think it was the video with the New Orleans mayor and Wynton Marsalis, when he talked about where they took down all the monuments in New Orleans. And he said, I think throughout the United States, there were about 700 such monuments. And he said, well, we're going to have a hard time replacing them. And I don't think so, because it seems to me in the history of the United States, we can find 700 prominent individuals who, you know, reflect the highest level of moral integrity and contribution to the American society, to replace these Confederate monuments. And those can be individuals from the political realm, or science, or education, or sports, that really reflect the ideals of the American spirit to replace these Confederate monuments.
So I'm going to just take a little stop here. So Linda, you talk about replacing the monuments, and I'm wondering, is there an alternative? There's replacing or maybe repositioning. Anyone have a thought about that? Maybe use the chat.
We talked about that in our group, about putting like the Confederate general statue in a situation like putting it in a Confederacy museum, but tell, you know, the history, you know, of what really happened, you know, and, you know, that, do the same thing with other things, you know, have you know, the other sides of the story, you know, in other ways, either, you know, in other historical contexts, maybe museums or something like that. Don't just you know, get rid of them entirely.
Okay, thank you. I think, yeah, it looks like a number of people are mentioning that. Char, did you want to just make a comment on that?
Jackie, it looks to me like the comments and discussion are the same thing, that people have talked about putting it in a museum.
Right. Okay.
If Shar had something other than that. Did you, Shar?
Well, no, we didn't come to a resolution. I think the discussion that came down to, one is the cost of moving into the museum. Secondly, what is the relevancy? Does it have artistic merit? Is there something historical? We decided pretty much no, there wasn't. But we were talking about context and changing minds. Is it possible to change minds? Brought up the article about my body is a monument. You want a monument? My body is a monument. Talked about possibly having that woman do a video of that and put that next to the monument to put it in context. We hadn't decided whether or not education, whether in the classroom in the museum could change minds. Some of us thought that it was necessary. Some of us were more hesitant about it. We had a very good discussion, by the way.
Good. Jackie, Katie Haviland is next.
Yes. Next. Thank you.
In our group, we talked about, well, number one, it being really kind of eye-opening in looking how and why many Southerners think the way they do. This is how they were brought up. This was their whole history. This was the only thing that they ever learned and talked about. And so coming from a different perspective, we need to put the big ears on. We need to listen just to get a better understanding of where we all come from, and then just try to get a real sense. I think Jim made the comment of, you know, come in on a level of, you know, we are all human, inquisitive, and just getting a sense of that humanity and that commonness. And, you know, as I said, just getting your big ears on and doing a listening rather than an attacking approach.
Okay, thank you.
We have Nancy Hartshorn is
kind
next.
of, yeah, thank you. Kind of going along with what Katie said, our group said that, you know, we could say to someone, well, what part of your history do you strongly relate to? Tell me what that means to you, to get, you know, a discussion going. Who knows what would happen after that? That's a question.
I'm sorry, what did you say? I missed it.
Okay, our group thinks that one good response to the statement, well, this is our history, is to ask, what part of that history do you strongly relate to? Or tell me more about how you see your history.
Yeah.
Question.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah. That's
Jackie, if I might, we have a comment in chat that I think is an important one for us to acknowledge. The writer says, please watch the way you characterize everyone from the South. How many challenges have you faced to your racial concepts? If we are truly in a culture of learning, I think it's important that we not entrench ourselves in a position without understanding the other side or other sides. So thank you for raising that question.
And that in itself, excuse me, that in itself, isn't that a beautiful learning, a good reminder? Because we perhaps do have our own viewpoint, and sometimes our perspective does not take into account other people's experiences. And that's part of what we're trying to learn here together. So again, thank you for your honesty and sharing. So let's continue.
Liz is next, Liz Schweers.
Yes, I just, since I moved to Florida in '88, I've been quite surprised at how often I have, I or my kids have been exposed to the KKK in terms of parents coming into the school or parades in public spaces on a very regular basis. And you may know on, I think it's 25A, there is a, near Walmart in Fruitland Park, there is an apartment complex called the Quarters.
Yeah.
That doesn't have a very good history in terms of, you know, it was a surprise to me that when I was told to stay out of the Quarters, it meant the Black section of town. And there's an awful lot of that still going on. There was a fight at the kids' high school, and the KKK came to the high school en masse and parked in the parking lot. So this hasn't gone away. There's a lot of intimidation still out there. And so it's good to have a discourse with people, but it has to be two-way. And in rural areas, it is not a two-way discussion at all.
No, it's I wonder, yeah, it's a very emotional topic. It's an emotional situation. Again, I wonder if there isn't part of some grieving and this unaddressed trauma. I mean, I don't want to say on either side, but I think there's so much that's not been resolved for healing. So I just wonder, again, we do have a comment, and thank you. Again, we want to respect everyone's perspective, but there is also a comment that we don't want to characterize everyone from rural areas as having one perspective either. So again, we're all learning. We're trying to be politically correct or sensitive, but we're in this lovely sharing, we're learning that sometimes we have a position that umbrellas our language. Thanks so much. Go ahead.
Suzanne Young Mercer is next.
Hi, I am the diversity chair in New York State, sorry. And in our group, I mentioned that we realize, and if I didn't mention this part in my comment, but January 6th made us realize that there are many, many, many people in this country who are not willing to give up privilege easily, right? So but we know that although half of 150,000 or 150 million people voted for a man who created a lot of division and dissension in this country, but all of those people are not, I don't believe, I truly believe that all of those people do not believe all the things that he may have espoused. I'm sure a lot of them do. So what we have to realize when we're talking about this, about racism, is that we have to meet people where they are and listen and see if they're willing to hear our point of view. Because we are not going to move everybody over to our side. So there's people that we can. They might not come all the way over. One of the ladies in my group talked about her parents who live in the South, have lived there all their lives, and although they've changed, you know, some of their thinking is better, there's still stuff that they learned that they lived with for all their lives. And so it's not going to be so easy for people to give up their belief systems, because we've now come to realize that everybody has rights. Equality belongs to us all, and we have to work at it each and every time we can with the people who are willing to hear us, because we know not everybody's going to be willing to hear my place. Thank you.
Thank you. And I mean, it's certainly, I think that point you're making, learning about, I'm going to use the word indoctrination, the textbooks, hijacking the textbooks to teach the generations. It's certainly helpful to understand why there are such entrenched racist beliefs, and hopefully there are folks who were raised with that and realize, you know, that just doesn't seem right, and they're working on it, as we all are, because we've all been indoctrinated in some way. There's racial conditioning, which is why we're here to learn about it and see how we can continuously, both internally and in our actions, minimize it and move more and more towards the recognition of the oneness of all of us, the oneness of humanity.
Jackie,
so, yeah.
Can I follow up with Suzanne for a minute, please?
I could never say no to you, Linda.
I have find myself becoming more and more pessimistic about a hopeful future. I am not a Black woman, but I rail at the notion of baby steps. You know, take these little crumbs and things will get better. When I look at the people who have been elected to represent us, the divide is so dramatic between those people who believe that everyone is human and equal and deserves the same shots, as opposed to those who believe that certain groups of people are less human and clearly inferior and deserve nothing because of an array of misconceptions. So, Suzanne, help me, if you can, be a little bit more optimistic. What is it that we can expect to come out of this on a policy level? I mean, I see changes in flags in Mississippi and names of buildings in Alabama, and man, I see that as window dressing. And I don't know how to get to the heart of it to eradicate the underlying assumption that dictates the most abhorrent behavior ever.
I want to say, Linda, that I with you am very pessimistic. Because I think as an African American, we have been taking baby steps, right? We've been, you know, we had the civil rights revolution in the 60s, where we got policies, and this is where things get to change, laws that protect people's rights. But depending on who's in office, as we have seen, they pull back on a lot of those laws. You know, now they're saying, you know, we're post-racial after Obama, and so the South doesn't need voting rights laws that protect people's rights to exercise the one right that we have that can make a difference. And we're also seeing with a lot of what happened when Obama was president, and the fact that he had a Congress that was really working against him, that a lot of the things he did was through executive orders. And we know those change things only for the moment, because the next president that comes in gets to write his own executive orders and change a lot of that. So, you know, I think, you know, I have a friend who's also like, I don't get it. We can't change it. We can't change everything, right? We can't, but we're one person, we can't change the world, but we can change people around us. We can have conversations with people who don't necessarily agree with us, and try to have meaningful conversations so that you understand my plight and are willing to at least listen to me. Okay, because it took all the years that we've been in this mess. It's going to take, you know how they say when you gain weight over years, right? You can't lose weight in a month. It takes the same amount of time it took to get us here. It's going to take a while. This is not going to happen overnight. And fortunately, with the Black Lives Matter movement, we saw cultural interracial, with only one race, that we saw cultural, different people of different cultures coming together and realizing that maybe a lot of the stuff that African Americans were saying are true. And so the younger people are going to move us along, because I know that by the time, I'm not going to see any of this change. Whenever this change comes, it's not going to happen in my lifetime. But we have to believe that if they keep the movement moving, and that movement turns into policy, and people start believing that everyone has a right to what the 14th Amendment says delivers: equal protection under the law, the pursuit of happiness for everyone, then maybe we'll get there, but it's gonna take a while. It's definitely gonna take a while.
Yes, it will. Well, the fact that we're having these discussions and that those of us here are interested gives me hope. And some of the feedback that we've gotten about even thinking and realizing some of this white privilege and how we make statements and interact with people where before had never been considered, even that to me gives me hope that there are those who perhaps, you know, meant well and were just didn't realize and are now learning. So there is a group of people that can make changes. But let's hear if there's some responses in terms of both Linda and Suzanne's comments.
There are a lot of comments that have been made, which I kind of wish people would make out loud, because they're great comments. Let's take here's a comment that I think is worth pursuing, and then Judy Southard is next in line here. Jill Moss Greenberg writes, we should also consider the effect of changing demographics. It's easier to discuss racial inclusion and equality when white people are in the vast majority, but many, including many of those at the Capitol on January 6th, feel threatened by the prospect of becoming a minority. This is making many white people more resistant to the type of dialogue we are seeking. The underlying, as I hear in this message, is the zero-sum game. If I give you better rights, then I lose something rather than we all gain. okay? And I think that kind of thinking, that I'm going to lose my status, I'm going to lose something really big, keeps a lot of white people from making decisions that would make everybody's life better. But I don't know, Jackie, how do you want to do this? Because we've got a number of people with their hands raised in the queue, and a lot of chatter going on chat, but not people saying, yeah, I have something that I want to respond to. So how do you want to proceed here?
Well, again, we would love to hear those things, but I am going to also cull out one of the comments that was made. Shar Griffith, we need more opportunities to interact with people of different races. It's a vicious cycle. Racism creates segregation, and segregation reinforces racism in that, and I'll add that, in that we don't interact on a regular basis to know people as people. So this is a little effort here that we're maybe making introductions to one another that we can follow up on so that we get to know each other better. But I think that
Judy Southard is next.
Go ahead.
Okay, I just have a short statement, and I think it's optimistic. I grew up and presently live in one of the reddest states in the Union, but we have a movement called West Virginia Can't Wait. And we had candidates in the last election, and we haven't elected anyone to a big post yet, but there's hope. I self-identify as a liberal, and I'm not the only one. We're growing. Right now, though, we have a supermajority of right-wingers in our legislature, but we're fighting. We're still fighting, and we haven't given up, and we'll come back. And I think it is a question of demographics. I believe our younger people will save us. Thank you.
Thank you. Linda Roberts has her hand raised, but Linda, if you would wait, since you've spoken once, we want to give some other people a chance first. You're in the queue. We'll come back to you. So we have Lisa Beavers, please.
Yes, I just want to bring in that was a great video too on Mitch Landau. And what he said is, you know, he had to make that call in 2017 to remove most of the statues in New Orleans. And he says these monuments represent a notion where the white people are superior to the Black people, and the Black people have to walk by these statues and feel less than. You know, that he says these statues are what we want our children to emulate. Is this what we want our children to emulate? Are there 700 possibilities of just brilliant opportunities to put Louis Armstrong? How about some women, he said. I don't see many women up on these statues. So there are also conversations. We always try to make it a personal situation. Well, last night, neighbors just came into town that are next to us, and we social distanced 12 feet apart and had a conversation, and it got elevated. I told them about what we're working on here. And those questions came up about what do we do with the statues? And to elevate conversation in our day, it is a ripple effect. And if you can find those common threads, we're all citizens of the United States, we all speak one language, we all enjoy food and the senses. There's so much to talk about. How the color, the variation of the color of one's skin be the determining factor to keep us as others boggles my mind. There's just so many things. Education, religion, we're allowed to practice religion. We're able to educate, we're able to make a living. We have to change laws. We have to put it right with the statues. That's all.
Thank you. Jan Shepard is next.
I wanted to say something about the fact that white people don't often have regular connections with African Americans. And since I moved to Columbus, which has quite a diversity of people here, I decided the way I was going to connect was to go to an African American church. And I knew one member of that church. So I went as a visitor, but I stayed for 2 years, and I joined a Bible study. Actually, I will go back after COVID too, because I made a lot of good friends, but the Bible study turned out to be very useful because people talked about their own lives. They talked about their connections with the divine, and we really got to know each other on a deeper level that way. And they were very kind to me. And I also told them one of the reasons I was there was because I've been indoctrinated, and it wasn't real direct being from the North. But I know that I have feelings that are, I don't even know where I got them exactly, but they came from my culture mostly. And so I wanted to erase those feelings by getting close to people as human beings. And so if you have that opportunity, you could try that too if it appeals to you.
So what I hear you say though is you made the opportunity, and that is something we can do if we're willing. You
Yes.
made that opportunity. Thank you, Jan. Thank you. I wanted 2 things, if I may. One of the things someone said was, I hope that Peg Hornsey said, I hope that the current spotlight on diversity and inclusion will not fade like it has so many times before. If we can get enough traction, perhaps we can get to a point of actual change. But and I just wonder, isn't that up to each one of us to not let that happen? We heard Judy Southard share that doing something on the level of who you vote for and the candidates. There are things that we can do and hopefully will continue to do to be sure that that spotlight does not move elsewhere. This is too important an issue. And as Linda pointed out, this is not a matter of, I think at the crux here, what we're hearing is fear. The fear that the white folks, there are those people who are white are afraid they're going to lose whatever. And that if people of color become the majority, that perhaps the white folks will be treated as poorly as whites have treated others. So,
which sort of suggests that white people know that their behavior has been bad.
Really?
I mean, that just crosses my mind. Linda Roberts is next, but let me sort of make a transitional comment here. We're still focusing on individual. What can I do? How do I change my perspective? When that's very important, but it begs the question of how do those individual perspectives feed into institutional and structural racism, and how we can have some agency in changing that. So chew on that for a minute while Linda has her second shot. There you go.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
I have a number of thoughts. One, when in our breakout group, we also talked about textbooks. And I think someone mentioned that they believe the textbooks still have this distorted view of history. So, I mean, that's a huge thing to address in terms of, indoctrination and why, we continue to have individuals in the country who hang on to this distorted history. The other thing is just a couple of instances I wanted to talk about. Back up in Maryland, I knew a musician by the name of Daryl Davis, a Black musician, and he reached out to a KKK member to try to befriend that individual. And obviously at the outset, they were far apart. And what Daryl Davis said, which was a kind of a telling statement, he said, "How can you hate me if you don't even know me?" I thought it was just a wonderful thing. And I've thought so often about that, because in a sense, it also applies to my own situation. And later he and the KKK member became best friends, believe it or not. From a personal standpoint, it's different, of course, but I'm a transgender woman. So to me, the marginalization and discrimination is also something I felt in a different context. And when I left Maryland to live here in the villages, I know people said, "Oh, Linda, you know, it's so conservative down there. You're going to be ostracized. You won't find any friends. You'll find a very difficult environment." But what's happened is just the opposite. I have hundreds of friends in the villages. And at first, people had that fear factor because they didn't understand, what does it mean to be transgender? Why are you that way? Are you a freak or something, you know? And but as people got to know me as an individual, as a person, all of those barriers began to fall, and I became friends with many people who at first were very standoffish about me. So it takes, little steps, meeting people, being out there, having courage, if you will, to leave my comfort zone. A couple of the things also, someone mentioned a church. I volunteered a year ago in St. Lucia, and I was volunteering in a small, very poor section of a town in St. Lucia. And I'm Catholic, and they were sponsoring us, the Catholic Church there. And I went to church there the 2 weeks I was there. And basically, I was the only white person in the church. But I walked in and I went right up to the front pew, and I was going to participate. And I was going to, for me, it was a cultural experience, and I just really enjoyed it. And you got to do, we all need to do that. We need to take risks. We need to try to insert ourselves in places that are maybe not comfortable.
I think Linda, because we're going to have to wrap that up. But what I really hear you say, and thank you, is as we get to know people, that's really where the barriers can fall. And I think as you're addressing, prejudice spills over into all sorts of arenas. And that certainly, again, it is the individual bias. But as we are exploring, we realize as we address these other biases, the racism, and we look and recognize the humanity of all people, that spills over into all these other groups. And as we open our minds and hearts, and again, getting to know one another, one person recommended and suggested, if I can jump back, if we're wanting to get involved or meet other people, we can get involved with the NAACP. We can donate, we can attend meetings. I know we have a lot of Zoom meetings and plenty of webinars that are available. There is all sorts of ways for us to reach out and make sure we have opportunities to mix with people who don't look just like us. And what other? Okay, so let's go back to some other people had their hands up or had comments.
No.
Okay, so listening, I'm wondering, we each come from our perspective. Some are hopeful, some perhaps are less hopeful. The very fact, I'm going to just share my perspective, the fact that we're here, so many of you are attending. Again, they can be baby steps, and certainly the impatience to reach what should be normal as far as recognizing all people are part of one family and should have the same opportunities. To reach that realization, I'm impatient as well, but at least, again, each one of us has this opportunity to carry along, to make inroads, to reach out to others, to talk how we talk to the friends, our friends about this. And we also have the opportunity to contact, if we want to make changes, structural changes, we have that opportunity with how we vote, letting those in power know what our position is. There are things that we can do. I know from AAUW, we have what's called lobby days where we do go and address our state politicians, or excuse me, elected officials.
Politicians was okay, Jackie.
Okay, well, for me.
Politicians works.
Thank you.
I should tell you that Alita has her hand up now too.
Oh, good. Okay, so please.
Tag, you're it.
I have several things to say, and I'm going to try to say them all quickly. And I've kind of thought of them in terms of an evolutionary process. We were talking about how things today seem to be the same as they were 50 years ago when we were coming up. And I think it's an evolutionary process. It's kind of like with cigarettes. When the country started a campaign to end smoking, it takes about 20 years to make some kind of an evolutionary change like that. And it is coming. I see some of it with my suburban grandchildren. They have been in mixed race educational schools for all of their lives. So their thinking is, like, when they come to visit me, they bring all of these interracial kids. And so to them, they don't see Black versus white. So it's nice so it is changing, but it's going to take a time to change. So their children will have the similar experience. The problem comes in when you've got communities, I'll say rural communities, where you don't have an opportunity for different cultures to mix. So those kids, unfortunately, are continuing to learn what they see in their environments. But it will change when they go away to college. Frequently, that's the first time people have had an opportunity to mix with those of other cultures. I was one of those that thought that when Obama was elected that we were moving into a post-racism world. Boy, was I surprised when Trump came in, only to find that no, nothing has changed. I'm still hopeful, but I'm just worried that it's never going to get any better. I do watch my grandson who plays these video games with people from all over the world, literally. So I think that's another group of kids, regardless of where they live, rural or suburban or city, they are getting to have relationships with people from other cultures. So I am hopeful, and I see an evolution. It's just going to take a while. That's all.
Thank you for that infusion of hope.
Thank you so much. Yes.
I appreciate that.
Okay, any other comments? Any other observations?
I have a comment, observation maybe, coming back to the topic of Confederate monuments. I see them very much as emblematic of systemic racism. And while I would like to think that that's sort of distant, let me share with you a current bill that is making its way through our state legislature. It's HB 1 and SB 484. Its title is Combating Public Disorder. It's a dangerous bill because it is clearly directed at infringing our First Amendment rights to assemble and protest peacefully. So there's a whole piece of the bill that is troublesome on that level. It may be important for you to know that the governor proposed this back in September as a reaction to the protests that were going on in the wake of George Floyd's murder. It didn't get a lot of traction back then. So after January 6th, he repackaged and rebranded it, and people are now kind of jumping on board because, you know, we have to stop that kind of thing. It is not really combating public disorder. It is stomping on our constitutional rights. But the piece that is troublesome to me in the context that we're talking right now is that there's a piece of that bill that protects Confederate monuments. And the definition of monument is so broad that it also includes the Confederate flag. If you destroy any of these Confederate monuments in the state of Florida, you will be subject to 15 years in prison. I would say I'm speechless, but I so rarely am in that situation that nobody who knows me would believe it. But I find it stunning that our governor specifies this as his #1 priority, getting it passed. And what it says about institutional and systemic racism in the state of Florida. This is real, folks. This is very real. And while many monuments are being taken down or relocated or whatever, there's still that pushback. And so it's a topic that I think allows us to sort of back off the whole racism issue and start talking about something else. But it's real and it's here today. That bill, after its first hearing in the House, passed by 11 to 3 or 6. So if you live in Florida, do what you will. Christine Loken Kim.
Okay, excuse me 1 second. Linda, perhaps later, or we can send it out if anyone is interested in finding out more about those bills and how we can address them. If you will share that with me, or we'll share it both on the chat, and we'll also send it out to all of those on our email list with a little blurb about it. So thank you very much for sharing that. Christine.
Well, my comment doesn't really follow very well after Linda's because she's talking about the pushback. But I just wanted to say that, you know, the fact that in 2020, with the George Floyd demonstrations and all, that we did have such a big movement to like get a new flag in Mississippi, which is beautiful with the magnolia, you know, and not offensive in any way. I mean, it's something to be proud of, a beautiful flower. And that so many of the monuments are being removed. I know that didn't just happen in a flash, that all the ones that were removed had people working for a long time, but they just couldn't get traction. And this year, there was a lot of traction. It's been a big point, and a lot of them have come down. I think that's just great. I think that some people mentioned taking the monuments and putting them in a museum, but of course, if the museum's in the South and it's a museum to the Civil War, then what's the narrative of that? But I think the value of some of those statues is that they are beautiful works of art. You know, somebody had to figure out how to make the horse balance on 2 feet. That's very tricky. So more like an art museum, or appreciated as art, but not as who the heck that guy is. But
anyway, I think this year the little baby steps took a big leap, and you know, there's a lot of other ways that we didn't leap, but I think it's great that all these monuments are finally coming down. That's all.
Okay, thank you. Yeah. Well, then perhaps they're symbols. There's a lot, we wonder, is it a Band-Aid or is it the cure? We can think about that, but it's a step.
Debbie Steele is next.
Yeah. Hi, I'm from Port Townsend, Washington, as well as Gina Weber down on my thing. She's down there on the bottom. And we've been coming for several sessions. And first I want to thank you for this because it's been really wonderful. And I wanted to speak to Alita Wilson's comments. And thank you for those comments, and tell you that Gina and I are from a small rural community. And we have 1% Black. Is that right, Gina? 1%? I think it is.
Close.
Yeah, and okay. It's a struggle because Gina and I both belong to an AAUW group. It's called the Justice League. And we're doing a lot of the same kind of things we're doing here, you know, talking about different subjects, reading things, learning. In that very first slide you put up, it was wonderful, and I'd love to get a copy of that, the one where the circles are, and I'm in the learning curve, working my way up to the growing curve. But Alita, how do we approach this when we're all so isolated? We don't have a Black church to go to. We do have a small Black Lives Matter, and I mean small. I think there's 4 people. And a lot of us have made contributions to that group. And we have 1 Black woman in AAUW. And we are all a little nervous about how to approach her without appearing to be overeager. So I guess my question is more of a statement that the difficulties in a rural community, the fact that we're trying, not that we're trying, that we are working on social justice issues, and we want to get out of the place we've been and move into a much more growing, accepting group. And any ideas you have that might help us do that. And I remember you from last time, or a couple of months ago, I think it was your husband that said, and I said this to the group Monday night, that once, I think he said, if you want to meet somebody, just walk up and say hello and tell them what your name is. Don't try to make a big deal out of it. I think that I remembered that correctly. So that's all. And again, thank you all for letting us come from the West Coast and join you.
Thank you.
Have to get up at dark 30 to be here.
Yeah, I still have my pajamas on under here.
Well, you know, I've been wearing mine since I think last February. So yeah, don't you love Zoom?
We have time maybe for a response. Do we have a response that to that, or?
Well, it sounds like she is, and I'm sorry I don't have the name, that you all are already doing some of the things, pretty much all that you can do. You're in a small community. And I like the idea of walking up to somebody and saying hello. And for the lady, the Black woman in your population that you want to talk to, you're not sure how to approach her. It's just about just being real honest. Now, you don't know how that person will respond to you approaching her honestly. Introducing yourself, letting her know that you would like to invite her to join maybe the AAUW, I'm not sure, but coming up, thinking about how you can approach her. Before approaching her, you may find that she's very open, or she may be one of these very militant people who wants to, you know, be unkind to you. You have no way of knowing how someone is going to respond to your outreach. So all you can do is just approach and hope to get a good response. It sounds like you're doing all the things that you can do in your small environment. So I don't really have any other suggestions. Do you have any suggestions, Blake? No. No. Right.
Okay, but thank you so much. Thank you both.
It's a challenge.
But it's, again, wanting to and hearing how other people are taking steps. By the way, I think, Debbie, you said you're contributing to Black Lives Matter. Perhaps you might want to go to a meeting and get to know those 4 women who are doing that, because this is becoming an ally. We can do a lot in terms of allyship, being supportive, not walking in there like we're experts, but just going, demonstrating our interest and our wanting to support these initiatives. These are beginnings. So you already have something in common, and that's for any of us, right? We find things we have something in common with, and that starts the ball rolling in terms of developing relationships. So thank you all. I appreciate that we've had good conversation, and you've all been very verbal, at least through chat. And so we'll see how that we continue along with that. But we're going to start to wrap up. We do have a few polling questions we'd like to ask you to participate in. They are anonymous, and we'll share those now. And here are the polling questions. If you would, you can answer them. Again, they're anonymous. Were you aware of how Confederate monuments came about before this session? 2, has your opinion about Confederate monuments changed after this session? 3, do you see a connection between systemic racism and Confederate monuments? And 4, do you think that relocating or removing Confederate monuments reflects a change in racist attitudes and thinking? So we'll give you a moment to answer those. It doesn't take long for those to be answered.
Looks like we're done.
Okay, would you?
I will share the results.
Share that with us?
Does everybody see that? You know, I think our responses to the first one really reflect our education. I was raised in the North, while the Confederate ladies weren't writing our textbooks. We certainly were fed mythology through our history classes as well. So yay, the truth will set you free.
So I'm not sure if this appears while we're recording, so let's just identify that in terms of were you aware of how Confederate monuments came out before the session. 44% said yes, and 56% said no. So, okay. Next one. Has your opinion about Confederate monuments changed after this session? Interestingly, 50% said yes and 50% said no.
But notice we didn't ask which direction you might have changed your mind. So people may have had an opinion in one direction or the other before, but that's interesting.
Yeah, go ahead, Linda, next.
Do you see a connection between systemic racism and Confederate monuments? We've got 97%, so the vast majority of us say no or say yes. Some of us don't see that link, and maybe we need to talk about what they're seeing instead. And finally, do you think that relocating or removing Confederate monuments reflects a change in racist attitudes and thinking? Again, the vast majority of us believe, yes, that those actions reflect a change. Cool. Excellent.
Good.
So there we are.
So thank you. We want to thank all of you. Thanks, Linda. We want to thank all of you for, it's very intriguing. That will lead us to some other discussions for sure. We do want to thank you all for attending. As we're discovering, racial conditioning has been foisted upon us for most of our lives, if we've been aware of it or not. So it will, as has been mentioned, it will take a great effort for us to undo it, but it is not impossible. Being here today is one step, and we can turn to each other for support and feedback. These are important and deep issues and emotional ones. There's grieving and that has been done and needs to be done, and the need for healing from unresolved trauma. So there is a lot below the surface here. And hopefully the steps of addressing these symbols is a beginning. For many, they think that we think that those are addressing it directly, and we'll see. We have to take a look perhaps deeper and see where we're at. And again, we have that opportunity to see where we are on that spectrum.
Jackie, Judy Southard has her hand up, so I think she has a comment that she'd like to make.
Okay.
Just a short one. I've heard mentioned several times textbooks, and as one who used to help to choose textbooks for our area, our choices were limited, and many of our textbooks were contaminated with mythologies of the southern area of the country, because publishers tend to publish textbooks that please Texas, because Texas is such a large state with a large population of students. So I just wanted to point that out.
Wow.
Okay.
I didn't know that. Thank you. Thank you. Wow.
Thank you. Okay, I think we're going to, I will, as promised, we're going to have an opportunity for announcements. So does anyone have announcements that they'd like to share? Something going on with your chapter in another community, some recommendations? This is the time.
Jackie, I have one while people decide if they want to raise their electronic hand.
Okay.
I just came across a book. It's brand new, folks, hot off the press. It wasn't even in our libraries yet. It is called The Sum of Us.
Heather McGee.
By Heather McGee, and that's McGhee. In my opinion, The Sum of Us could be the most important book you will read this year. Dr. McGee is an economist, and she is arguing against the zero-sum game, and arguing instead that we all lose because of racism, that white people evidently are willing to suffer consequences in order to prevent Black people from enjoying anything. The example, and it comes up, it's sort of a metaphor that she uses, it comes up in the second chapter, is public swimming pools. There was time in the history of this country when there were hundreds of public swimming pools all around the country. And when the demand was made that they be integrated, rather than integrate, they filled them in, covered them over, shut them down, so that nobody had a place to swim. The Sum of Us by Heather McGee.
Yeah, and we will send that out as we We will be, again, we've had a request in the past for a summary of all of the resources we've provided to you. We did send out one of our book resource list, which is being updated all the time, and we would appreciate you all sharing any of these new things with us, but we will certainly include this new book. So we will, oh, let's go here. Please, whoops, where did we go? There we go. So next month, our fourth Wednesday of the month, March 24th, our next topic is going to be systemic racism, and we will be addressing housing. But please, if you have any recommendations, suggestions, you've come across some other material you think that we should know about and we can share with others, please do send those, email us here at divcomaaauw@gmail.com so that we can all benefit from your learnings and sharings. So we want to thank you so much for attending. We appreciate your participation, that you were able and willing to share from your experiences and from your heart. We hope as we continue to build community, that willingness to share these honest feelings, learnings, that this is a safe place for you to do it. And we honor your commitment and your courage. We do encourage it all, and we can find, we can be allies to one another on this journey to become allies to all people. So thank you again. We'll see you next month. And we will send out to you the information about the bills that Linda talked about. And yes, we hope, thank you. We hope that these thought-provoking conversations will continue for you throughout the month until we're together again. So until that time, thank you. Stay healthy, stay well, and we'll see you next time.
Diversity Committee people, stay on the line, please. Thank you all.